On September 6th of 2011, 5 days before the 10th anniversary of 9/11, a 32-year-old man committed a horrible atrocity at an IHOP restaurant in Carson City, Nevada. Afterwards, life in this town would never be the same again. This is the case of the IHOP Massacre. Hello, friend, and welcome to High Time Crime. My name's Joel, and on here I specialize in true crime and also being extreme.
Joel, are you sure you want to jump off that?
I'm
That
gonna
looks
jump
pretty.
off of this and show you how to be extreme.
But anyway, today we're going over a puzzling case of a man whose inner demons persuaded him to commit an act of pure evil. IHOP was established on July 16th of 1958 by a group of men including Jerry Lappin, Al Lappin, and Albert Calise. As most of you know, the letters stand for International House of Pancakes. For many years, this was the name they went by until shortening the name to IHOP in the year 1973. Throughout the course of their run, they originally just served breakfast, but have since expanded their menu to include lunch and dinner options as well. The particular location of the IHOP in our story today was in a shopping mall next to a barbecue joint called Locals Barbecue. It was also across the street from a large casino called the Casino Fandango. According to a person who's familiar with the area, this IHOP, which has since closed down permanently, was originally a Bob's Big Boy in the 1970s before being converted into an IHOP in the early 1990s. But many years ago, it would wind up being the scene of a horrific tragedy, all because of one man. Eduardo Sension was born in Villa Corona, Mexico on July 22nd of 1979. While little information is known about his early childhood, we do know that he moved to the United States in August of 1993 at the age of 14. Eduardo was then enrolled in South Tahoe High School, where he graduated in the year 1998. Ironically, his senior project was about gun safety. Eduardo had at least 5 brothers, and he lived with his mother and family members. He was also a devout Catholic and known for being religious, the type who immersed himself in the Bible on a daily basis. But when he turned 18, the signs of extreme mental illness started to pop up. That year, in 1999, Eduardo began complaining about being harassed by his fellow co-workers. Meanwhile, his employer at the time informed his family that nobody was even doing anything to him. And the same employer then put them in touch with some mental health workers, and pretty soon, Eduardo was officially diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. Because of this diagnosis, he was required to take medication. Now, overall, Eduardo had no serious criminal history, but there were some police reports on record. One thing that took place in April of 2000 was that he was sent to a medical facility for treatment. While at home one day, family members noticed that Eduardo was acting a bit stranger than usual. Eduardo was claiming that objects he was moving were slowing down, and that he wanted to stop them from slowing down. Additionally, he was refusing to take his medication, fighting with his family, and asking for help repeatedly over and over again. Before long, the situation became so bad, his family members felt it necessary to call the police. Upon arriving, police corroborated Eduardo's family's claims, but he was not cooperative and didn't want for them to take him away. Evidently, he got really aggressive with the officers, and so soon they took him and restrained him to the back of the police car. Afterwards, Eduardo was taken to a mental health facility where he was put on a 72-hour hold before being released. Another police report took place the following year in 2001, where during a mental health checkup, Eduardo suddenly ran out of the house and up the street. Some other official police reports of Eduardo's included 2 calls related to traffic stops, 1 call related to vandalism, and 1 call related to a hit and run. Nevertheless, Eduardo was never convicted on anything and did not have a criminal record. Also in 2001, Eduardo was officially declared permanently disabled due to his mental problems. Now, one thing that's not entirely clear is why Eduardo sometimes went by a different name. For whatever reason, he not only had an entirely separate name he used, aka Eduardo Perez Gonzalez, but he also used a different social security number. How that was allowed, I'm unsure. And now, as far as Eduardo's personality and interests were concerned, well, people actually described him in a mostly positive way, believe it or not. He was seen by many as a quiet and gentle yet good-humored person. He liked to go to the casino, and he worked at his family's grocery store, which was located in South Lake Tahoe. Here, he worked alongside a bunch of his family members. According to his family, Eduardo avoided having intimate relationships with women because he was afraid of passing on his genes. On top of his other activities, Eduardo had a strong interest in guns. Not only did he own multiple guns, including rifles and sidearms, but he also actively used them. On a monthly basis, Eduardo visited the Carson City Public Range, where he practiced his shooting. He was also known to have gone to several gun shows in Reno, Nevada. Police later learned of the many gun purchases he made. Several of these he made under his alternative name, Eduardo Perez Gonzalez. Additionally, he lied on the gun forms. On these forms, you're supposed to inform the clerk whether or not you've been diagnosed with mental problems in the past, or if you've ever been sent to some form of institution. But in regards to both of those things, Eduardo lied, claiming that he was mentally sound. In January of 2009, Eduardo officially filed for bankruptcy protection. He listed over $42,000 in outstanding debts, and the debt included medical bills, a car loan, and credit card payments. Only 4 months later, however, his case was dismissed. Around the same time as this, or maybe a year prior, Eduardo had yet another schizophrenic episode. During this episode, his brother recalls that Eduardo was at work one day when he felt like he was slipping into one of his episodes. As a result, he was sent back home with his mother, and then shortly thereafter, Eduardo's brother received a phone call from their mother saying Eduardo needed to be taken to the hospital. While taking Eduardo to the hospital in his van, Eduardo's brother said that Eduardo was acting extremely erratic and violently shaking the van and trying to break all of the windows. It got so bad that Eduardo's brother was forced to stop at his own house, get out, and call 911 from there. From that point, the police then came and picked Eduardo up and took him to a mental health facility. He was released not long after. Now, for a pretty reasonable length of time following this, it appears that Eduardo did not have major episodes, at least any that are publicly documented. But then all of that changed when, during June of 2011, Eduardo switched to a new doctor. Upon doing so, the doctor recommended that Eduardo change the medication he was on, and naturally, Eduardo complied. Only a month after this, he encountered a priest on the side of the road and said something ominous to him. After walking up to the priest, Eduardo apparently begged him for help, saying, "They're telling me to do bad things." And by they, Eduardo of course meant the voices in his head. Which, by the way, after doing so many cases with people who hear voices inside of their heads, I genuinely wonder why so many of the quote-unquote voices seemed to have bad intentions. It's very, odd. Anyway, according to Eduardo's family, the voices in his head telling him to do bad things were oftentimes a sign that he was getting sick. Other signs that he was in a bad place were when he would seem withdrawn, begin to lose a sense of humor, and experience a flat facial effect. But whenever this happened and Eduardo became conscious of it, he would immediately go to his mother, give her the keys to his gun safe, and ask for help. Other than the one involuntary hold at a psychiatric facility we talked about, he had gone to mental facilities multiple times voluntarily. One of the primary triggers for his schizophrenia was whenever he saw children being reprimanded. In fact, evidently, any form of verbal or physical conflict was a trigger. Anyway, other than the one unusual incident with the priest, the only other odd report about Eduardo was that approximately 2 weeks before what would take place, Eduardo's mother claimed that she heard drilling in his room. As for what that drilling was, well, we'll talk about that shortly. So the night before the shooting, on September 5th of 2011, Eduardo was having a pretty normal day, it seemed. He worked a 10 to 11 hour shift at his family's store, and afterwards, he went up to a place called Bodine's Casino. According to surveillance footage, by around 9:58 p.m. that night, he was at Bodine's Casino. While there, Eduardo could be seen playing the slots machine and every now and again running back and forth to the ATM to get money out. In total, he spent about less than an hour here and officially left at 10:52 p.m. That same night, his family members reported Eduardo still appeared to be acting quite normal, and they even saw him take his medication. But the following morning, after taking the day off of work, he said to his family, "I should have gone to work today." Less than an hour following this ominous statement, Eduardo was seen parked in the parking lot directly next to a grocery store called Rayleigh's. Rayleigh's was located in the northernmost part of the same shopping center where IHOP was. Eduardo was driving a blue Chrysler Voyager minivan, and on the back of the van was a sticker that read, "God bless our troops." A few minutes after sitting there, pure evil was about to commence.
Carson 911, what's the address of your emergency?
It's IHOP. There's a shooting going on. Multiple shooting.
Shooting where?
In the IHOP.
In the IHOP?
In the IHOP.
Is it inside?
Automatic weapons. IHOP. Get there right now. Automatic weapons. We saw one guy going in. Now he's coming back out with a gun. He's shooting people in the parking lot. He's got an automatic weapon. Ryan, get out of there.
Okay, we're getting people on the way. Are you in the
Ryan,
car?
move! He's shooting at us now.
The time was now 8:09 a.m. on September 6th of 2011. 32-year-old Eduardo Sension was sitting in his van in the parking lot in front of a beauty store. As he was sitting there in his van, a witness saw Eduardo taking up multiple spaces in the parking lot and got ready to confront him about it. However, at the last moment, the person decided against it. 13 minutes later, at 8:22 a.m., Eduardo put the car in drive and slowly drove from where he was in the parking lot to a spot in front of the Rayleigh's grocery store. Eduardo then drove from where he was in front of the grocery store back in the direction of the beauty store, and then around the back of the grocery store. 6 minutes later, Eduardo drove to the other side of the shopping center and pulled into the IHOP parking lot in his van. But after Eduardo pulled up in the van outside, he then exited the vehicle with a modified fully automatic rifle. Once he got out of his van, he first stood next to the van for a couple of seconds and then unloaded a 30-round magazine into the air. Next, he dropped the magazine and reloaded before making his way to the entrance of IHOP. Meanwhile, as Eduardo was prepared to enter the restaurant, inside of the IHOP were as many as 28 patrons and 9 workers. One of this group of patrons were a husband and wife by the names of William, aka Wally Gunderson, and Florence Gunderson. Wally and Florence were sitting at a table towards the back of the restaurant. Another group, who were located in a back booth of the restaurant, included 5 Nevada National Guardsmen. Seated from left to right, they were Sergeant First Class Jeremiah Mock, age 32, Lieutenant Colonel Heath Kelly, age 35, Sergeant Caitlin Kelly, age 25, Master Sergeant Christian Reggie, age 38, and Sergeant First Class Miranda McElhenney, age 31. At the time, the service members were discussing the drills that they were involved in that upcoming weekend. The group was in the middle of a bit of a banter when one of them made a joke that caused everyone in the booth to go into a fit of laughter. But then came the gunfire. Now, in the heat of the moment, nobody was 100% sure what was happening. Everywhere around them, they could see and hear people screaming and debris rising up in the air. They could also smell gunpowder. One first-hand report comes from Sergeant Caitlin Kelly. Sergeant Kelly was sitting in the middle of the back booth when she looked up to see a man wearing a maroon shirt and black pants had walked into the restaurant. When she first noticed him, he was standing about 20 feet in front of her. He was holding his rifle in the center of his torso when he began firing. The first couple shots he fired towards the left side of the room, and right away he hit Wally Gunderson in the leg and Florence Gunderson in her head. Florence was killed immediately, but Wally wasn't. Next, Eduardo proceeded closer to the back and shot at a table to the right where he hit 2 people. Then from that point, he moved closer inward and took aim at the back booth where he began firing multiple consecutive shots. 2 of the National Guard members were killed almost immediately, and they were Master Sergeant Christian Reggie and Lieutenant Colonel Heath Kelly. Master Sergeant Christian Reggie had been sitting on the right side of the booth, and Lieutenant Colonel Heath Kelly the left side of the booth. Meanwhile, the other soldier who had been sitting on the far left side of the booth, Sergeant Jeremiah Mock, had been shot in the arm. Seconds after the shooting started, he saw glass breaking behind their booth. Then together, he and Sergeant Kelly dropped to the floor. Sergeant Kelly did manage to bring Lieutenant Colonel Heath Kelly down with them, but he was already dying by then. She says that while all of this was going on, she tilted the table over a bit to create some degree of cover, but when Eduardo started shooting a bit lower, he wound up hitting her in her left foot. According to Sergeant Kelly, she saw Eduardo smiling when he was shooting the rifle. She described his appearance as that of a kid in a candy store, which is disturbing, to be honest. But once Eduardo was done firing at the soldiers, he turned around counterclockwise and shifted his attention to the opposite side of the room. From that point, he then fired multiple shots from his left to his right at patrons sitting in the booths. Several injuries were reported from this, but none were too serious. After that, Eduardo then began making his way through the middle of the restaurant in order to head back outside. While doing so, he evidently had a phone to his ear and he was talking to someone. But the phone records reportedly showed that he never made nor received an actual phone call. At the same time, Sergeant Mock and Sergeant Kelly were huddled under the booth. Sergeant Kelly was treating Mock's wounds with a makeshift tourniquet using Mock's own belt. Kelly herself had been shot in the leg, but she was still able to retain her composure. She even managed to remove her own belt and wrap it around Wally Gunderson's injured leg. Wally, who had just seen his wife killed right in front of him, was distraught and had since crawled his way under the same table Kelly and Mock were under. Within minutes, Sergeant Kelly used her cell phone to call her boyfriend and let him know she was okay. She also called Mock's wife, and Mock spoke to her on the phone and told her he loved her. Meanwhile, Sergeant McElhenney, who had been shot in the stomach, was under a different table nearby. After Eduardo exited the IHOP from the same door he came in from, Sergeant McElhenney, despite the intense bleeding, was able to call 911 via her cell phone and make her way toward the entrance to look outside and see where Eduardo had gone. Meanwhile, after exiting the restaurant, Eduardo began running towards the parking lot. Here, a woman who had since escaped from the restaurant had just put on her helmet and was going to hop on her motorcycle to make a run for it. Before she could manage to do so, however, Eduardo ran up to her and shot her in the helmet. Afterwards, the woman dropped to the ground and was dazed. Next, Eduardo saw yet another woman running outside the restaurant next door, and he shot at her, but missed entirely. Instead of hitting her, the shots ended up hitting the restaurant next door, but fortunately nobody was injured. Following this failed attempt at another victim, Eduardo shot a couple of the businesses located in the same building as Locals Barbecue, including an H&R Block and a Wells Fargo. He also shot across the street at the Casino Fandango. But after that, he finally made his way back to the left side of his van and grabbed a Colt 38 revolver from the inside, and then it was all over. Eduardo put the pistol next to his head and did away with himself. In total, his reign of terror lasted 85 seconds. Here's an animated video of what this looked like. Now, the weapon Eduardo used was a semi-automatic gun called a Marenco MAK-90. The gun is a Chinese-made replica of an AK-47, and Eduardo had bought it in California in the year 1995. Shortly before the shooting, it is now known that Eduardo modified this rifle from being semi-automatic to fully automatic. If you remember the claim from earlier about his mother hearing a drilling sound coming from Eduardo's room 2 weeks before the shooting, well, that's more than likely what that sound was. Despite the seemingly random nature of Eduardo's crime, I think him modifying his weapon to automatic possibly suggests that it was more planned than it seemed. Additionally, when police searched his van, they uncovered 2 assault rifles, 2 handguns, 20 30-round loaded magazines, and 595 rounds of ammunition. To this day, nobody knows why Eduardo did this. He never wrote anything down, and at one point he even considered joining the military himself, but he couldn't. Regardless of motive or how much weaponry he brought, the end result of this spree was horrific. In total, 4 people were killed along with Eduardo himself, 7 were injured, and 79 shots were fired. First, let's talk about the injured. While there's limited information about some of the people injured, we do know about the ones who experienced more serious injuries. Betty Legun, or Legun, was the woman who Eduardo shot in the helmet while she was trying to get on her motorcycle. The only reason why she's alive today is because she was wearing a helmet, and because of the help of some really good doctors. Wally Gunderson was a retired Marine and the husband of one of the deceased named Florence Donovan Gunderson. Wally absolutely loved his wife, and the moment she was killed, he found himself in a state of pure shock. He was shot in the leg and had to have surgery, but later recovered. Another person injured was Sergeant Jeremiah Mock. Sergeant Mock served in Iraq and Afghanistan. According to him, when the experience took place, it brought him back mentally to his time in war. Overall, Sergeant Mock had a distinguished career in the military. First, he joined the Army at 17, Then after basic training, he became a truck driver. After that, Sergeant Mock held a number of positions over the next 9 years. From 1997 to 2001, he was assigned to the 173rd Airborne Brigade in Colorado. In 2003, he was assigned to Monterey Bay, California. In 2004, he was assigned to Iraq, Italy in 2005, and Afghanistan in 2006. During his terrible experience at IHOP, he got shot in his right arm and was forced to undergo a series of surgeries and rehabilitation. Believe it or not, when all of this took place, it was only his second day as part of the Nevada National Guard. He had since transferred there after being discharged from Afghanistan. After the shooting, he left the Nevada National Guard for some time, but then bravely re-enlisted. And in 2018, Sergeant Mock officially retired from the military following many years of admirable service. He now teaches conceal and carry and home defense classes and gives lectures. Sergeant Caitlin Kelly. For the 25-year-old Sergeant Caitlin Kelly, she always wanted to follow in her father's footsteps. He had been in the military, and she wanted to be in it too. That's partly why in 2005, she joined the Nevada National Guard. Sergeant Kelly was an honorable service member who did her job diligently. She also had a social life, one son, and a boyfriend of several years at the time. Her boyfriend's name was Jason, and in a strange way, this horrible experience brought them together even more. Sergeant Kelly had been shot in the foot during the shooting and had to undergo a series of surgeries. But then she had a really remarkable comeback story. Following all of the surgeries and some mental health counseling, her boyfriend proposed to her and the pair got married shortly after. She also became closer friends with Sergeant Mock and developed a new lifelong friend in Wally Gunderson. I'm really happy to hear that. But as you know, others did not make it out with their lives, unfortunately. Florence Louise Donovan Gunderson, who was 67 years old and born on July 16th of 1944 in Boston, Massachusetts. She was a beautiful wife to her husband Wally, a mother of 2, and a grandmother to 4 grandchildren. Friends and family described her as a very outgoing, active, and fun person. She loved the outdoors and doing activities such as skiing, sledding, and hiking. She also loved baking cookies with her grandchildren and helping the people she loved in any capacity. Florence was the type who cared immensely about others. For example, a friend reported that during one winter when she knew it was going to be really cold, she gifted their 2 young boys hats she knitted without them asking. But naturally, this was just one of countless examples of her caring nature. As a resident of South Lake Tahoe for 30 years, she had made a strong group of friends and family, and they all miss her dearly. Wally and Florence were still madly in love even until the day she died. Rest in peace to Florence. Lieutenant Colonel Heath Austin Kelly was 35 years old and originally from a place called Kenner, Louisiana. Colonel Kelly was a graduate of Norwich University and served on active duty in the United States Army from 1998 to 2005 as a field artillery officer. Then, from 2007 until the time of his death, he served in the Nevada National Guard. Kelly's job in the National Guard was as commander of the Joint Forces Headquarters, where he was in charge of training more than 100 soldiers. He also worked as a federal technician there daily. Throughout his prestigious military career, Colonel Kelly served selflessly and heroically. He had received various commendations and medals, including those for the Global War on Terrorism, National Defense Service Medal, and the Kuwait Defense Service Medal and Iraq Campaign. He had a great sense of humor and was liked and well respected by everyone. His main focus outside of his work was his home life, where he had a wife by the name of Tracy and 2 children, one of whom had only been born 9 weeks prior to his passing. Kelly was known for working on his house and had been a construction project manager. He was also a big fan of LSU football and was just overall a very competent, upstanding person. It's been reported that he didn't pass away immediately. He only passed away after being notified about the status of the other 4 National Guard members. He stayed dedicated to his service until the end. Rest in peace to Lieutenant Colonel Kelly, a great man. Army Master Sergeant Christian Reggie was 38 years old and had spent 19 years in the military, including 2 years in the Navy, and he was living with his fiancée and 4 children and serving in the Nevada National Guard. Born and raised in Hawthorne, Nevada, Sergeant Reggie grew up on a military base managed by his grandfather. His childhood friend by the name of Abe recalled that they were inseparable during their youth. "We were all we had," Abe said. Sergeant Reggie's family moved to Nebraska during their high school years, but after Abe returned to Nevada in 1999, the two rekindled their close friendship, bonding over shared interests like shooting guns and enjoying fast cars. Sergeant Reggie's love for cars was evident, and he had recently purchased a metallic green 1965 Pontiac GTO for hot August nights. Sergeant Reggie was a man of impressive physical and mental strength. He could perform 2,000 push-ups in a day and was a master chess player. His fellow soldier and friend, Master Sergeant Paul Kinsey, who served alongside Reggie in the 1/221st Cavalry in Afghanistan from mid-2009 to April of 2010. He described Reggie as a tall, muscular, and handsome man with a big smile. Kinsey was devastated by Reggie's death, saying, "It couldn't be my warrior buddy Chris, because that's not the way he's supposed to go out." Sergeant Reggie was deeply committed to his children, who were from 2 previous marriages. His dedication to them was evident throughout his life, with friends noting that he passed up a deployment opportunity in 2004 to stay with his family. Eventually, he served overseas in Afghanistan in 2009. Sergeant Reggie's kindness, humility, and unselfish nature left a lasting impression on those who knew him. Another friend who served with him from 2001 to 2006 described him as a dedicated father and professional who used the strength of his personality rather than his rank. To lead, he was just a damn fine person, his friend said. Reggie's friend Abe echoed these sentiments, calling him genuinely nice to the core, and noting that Reggie always put others before himself. Rest in peace to Master Sergeant Christian Reggie. And last, but certainly not least, Sergeant First Class Miranda Summerwind McElhenney. Sergeant McElhenney was born on July 22nd of 1980 in El Dorado County, California. She was in the National Guard for 13 years in total and had served in multiple capacities, including services related to medical, dental, and human resources. She was also a student at an online college known as Columbia Southern University. Sergeant McElhenney absolutely loved baking, and on a regular basis, she made desserts for people, such as cupcakes and cookies. Her personality was described as compassionate, friendly, and orderly. But the one under-discussed part about Sergeant McElhenney's personality was her resiliency. As we discussed earlier, Sergeant McElhenney was shot in the stomach and lived for quite a while. After being shot, she got up and called 911 and helped those around her. Then, once the authorities arrived, she was transported to a nearby hospital. While being loaded onto the ambulance, she even gave a thumbs up to everybody to let them know she was all right. Unfortunately, however, after being taken to the hospital, she soon bled out because of a bullet that hit one of her arteries. Rest in peace to Sergeant McElhenney. Her memory lives on. One last thing I'd like to say is thank you to everyone who has ever served and is currently serving in our military. The military members in today's case demonstrated highly impressive pressure under fire and extreme bravery. Every year on the anniversary of the shooting, there's a memorial walk or run hosted in memory of the victims in this case, and they've kept it up for a long time. I think that's amazing, to be honest. But anyways, thank you for watching this episode of High Time Crime. If true crime is your thing, then please like and subscribe because it's all we do. I also have an all-exclusive Patreon if you're interested in that. There's a bunch of tiers to choose from, and the third one allows for you to see a Patreon-only video, and that tier and the second one allow you to have your name at the end of each High Time Crime video. I hope you have a great rest of your day. Take care, friend.